Yesterday we started looking at revolutionary theory a bit, but we had to stop. So just continue with this revolutionary theory. So if you didn't watch yesterday's 5 minutes, you can go back and watch it first if you want to. So he says revolutionary theory, a theory which is firmly grounded in the reality it seeks to represent. So representation is its purpose as well. Represent. Okay. So it's like status quo theory. It also describes the reality. But the basic difference between the status quo theory and revolutionary theory is that the individual proposition or claims of which I ascribe the individual proposition of this theory, revolutionary theory. So it is the same as status quo theory in that it describes the reality, grounded in the reality it seeks to portray. And it accurately represents the phenomena with which it deals at a particular moment in time. So in that sense, there's no difference between revolutionary theory and status quo theory. They describe the same reality. But they ascribe, or the truth status of that reality is different in the two theories. And that takes into account our classification yesterday about the reality, the alternative, and how you go from this reality to that alternative. So the basic difference between status quo theory and revolutionary theory is their self-conception, I guess, in the sense that let's talk a bit about it closely. So status quo theory and then there's a revolutionary theory, RT. Now they both represent the same, try to describe the reality, and as far as I understand how we hear, they describe it correctly, both of them. So they describe the reality with which they are dealing, describe the reality correctly. But this reality for status quo theory is true universal reality. That's how things should be. Not just now, but all the time. And I guess, as we saw yesterday, if there are any shortcomings in this reality, they are shortcomings of actions rather than the shortcomings of how the reality should be. So those are practical shortcomings, I guess. On the other hand, revolutionary theory says, yes, this reality exists, and this reality has good in it and bad in it, but it is a contingent reality. So it's not a necessary reality. So for status quo theory, this is a necessary reality. I mean, this necessity must be normative, otherwise how can they? Anyway, but for evolutionary theory, this reality or its truth is contingent. That if it is contingent, it can be otherwise. But revolutionary theory says that it should be otherwise, because we can come up with better reality. We can build a better reality. So I think that's the basic difference he has described so far between the status quo theory and the revolutionary theory. So the proposition of revolutionary theory has truth significance, but they are always contingent, because their truth will change with the change in the background, in the structures, in the reality we are dealing with. On the other hand, status quo theory thinks that circumstances and the truth is truth no matter what. You know what I mean? So I don't know whether any such theory exists, but let's see. Anyway, so revolutionary theory is a theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to represent, the individual propositions of which are ascribed contingent truth, because truth is status. So this is the truth in this context, where status is the dominant force. So when this theory actually progresses and the situation changes, then this truth of those propositions would change, and you would have to, change your allegiance to those propositions. You will have to come up with new propositions, because it's a process. If you're talking about revolution, it's a process where you talk about the reality which exists and its problem and things, and then you imagine a different reality, but from within, or realistically. So you work with the existing reality, but you are in the process. So you want to change that reality and bring it closer and closer to your alternative or your imagined reality. So that, in that sense, there's the process. So in that process, truth status of proposition is changing, because the situation is changing, because the reality itself is changing. That's how I am understanding it at the moment. That's what that becomes clear in the next sentence, which is in parenthesis, that they are in the process of becoming true. Process. So process is important here. So because true or false, it depends on the situation and circumstances. So if our propositions are able to improve things, then they have sort of proven their truth to that extent. So there's a sort of pragmatic conception of truth here. But once they have achieved whatever achieve, they might not be useful or operable in the new situation and new context, and they might be false in that sense. as he goes on to say, dependent upon the circumstances. So the context is important. So the status quo theory is, ascribe absolute truth to its own proposition, but this one doesn't, because it's working with different realities in the process, and that's what he means by dialectic. It's a fancy Marxist word, but that's what it means. This triangle between existing reality and the process of changing that reality and the movement toward the alternatives, and this relationship between these three changes the status of these every moment. So it's very fluid in that sense. And that's what Hegel and Marx taught, in a sense, in a different context. So a revolutionary theory is dialectically formulated in this sense, and it can encompass conflict and contradiction within itself. The conflict and contradiction within itself. This conflict and contradiction is, as I said, the outcome of this dynamic between the existing reality and the process and the movement or non-movement toward the alternative, etc. And the whole back and forth between these three. Okay. So there's this dynamic between existing reality. Obviously, this existing reality is not permanent, so it's always changing, good or bad, and that's affecting the truth of the proposition about this reality. So there's the whole process. Process include a struggle between status quo and the people who are trying to build a new reality. So the dynamic, which is this permanent dynamic between these three elements, 1, 2, all of which are fluid in that sense, and they affect, like this affect the process, and the process affect the new reality, and the new reality affect the process itself, and then process affect the existing reality again. So this dynamic, I think they call dialectic, which just mean dialogue in its original Greek formulation. And truth and falsehood, as we can see, is defined pragmatically and contextually. And that's one of the basic difference between the revolutionary theory and status quo theory, which we have understood so far. But he is not finished describing it, so he's still some halfway through, or probably 75%. But I want to stop here because I don't want to rush into this, because it's an important things that will next time we'll start with a revolutionary theory of Israel choices, and that will give us time to think a bit about what we did today. Okay, see you next time.